The best-known fact about this place is a convenient lie. You have heard the official version dozens of times, in documentaries, in school books, from the mouths of tour guides who lead groups through damp corridors with a flashlight in hand and a memorized script. The version says that the Nazistas built a network of tunnels in the mountains of Polonia to serve as a secret bunker for Hitler, a glorious hideout, an underground fortress worthy of the Führer, an emergency solution for a dictator who feared Allied bombers. The explanation is tidy, it makes sense. It closes the matter, and it calms the curiosity of those who travel the few kilometers open to the public. But this explanation has a problem that no one mentions out loud. Albert Speer, the chief architect of the Tercero Reich and the man who personally supervised the construction, left records indicating 213,000 cubic meters of tunnels excavated in the Montanas Karuja. 80 years of exploration after the war, archaeologists, engineers and speleologists have managed to locate less than 100,000 cubic meters. This means that more than half of the most secret construction of the Tercero Reich is still there, inside the rocks, behind entrances that the Nazistas themselves dynamited when they fled, behind hastily sealed concrete walls, behind decades of moss, vegetation and silence. And that is just the beginning of what we do not know. Today, we are going to descend below the Montanas Karuja layer by layer and find what historians buried in the footnotes. We are going to see why the concrete used in this project exceeded the total allocated to build all the civilian air raid shelters in all of Alemannia in the same year. We are going to discover the fate of tens of thousands of prisoners who built these corridors and were never supposed to come out alive to tell what they saw. We are going to understand why Soviet teams left markings in Russian inside compartments that were supposed to be empty. We are going to get close to an armored train loaded with 300 tons of gold that departed in 1945 and which, according to groups active even this year, may be sealed just a few meters deep. And we are going to look head-on at a question that 80 years of research have not been able to answer. What was so valuable that the Nazistas preferred to kill their own builders rather than risk anyone knowing what was inside? The myth says it was a bunker. The truth is much darker. Let's start with what we know for sure. In 1943, Nazista Alemania was losing the war. The Esercito Vermelho had destroyed the myth of German invincibility in Stalingrado. In the western sky, Allied bombers crossed in formations of hundreds of planes and dropped explosives on factories, railroads, and entire cities. It was a matter of time before the industrial heart of the Tercero Reich stopped beating. The answer the generals found was radical. If the surface was exposed, the solution was to disappear from the surface. Entire factories transferred inside the mountains, laboratories, command centers, production lines. Inside the rock, protected by tons of granite and gneiss, the war machine could continue functioning even while everything above was reduced to rubble. The problem was finding the right mountains. After examining multiple locations, the choice fell on the Montanas Karuja, or Gory Soe, in Polonais, in the southwest of Baixia Silesia, which at the time was German territory. The rock was exceptionally hard, metamorphic. The Allies were far away. The region had a mining tradition, and the dense forest on the slopes offered natural cover for the movement of materials and personnel. It was the perfect location. The name of the project was Ries. In German, it means giant. And the name was chosen with precision. Work began in the second half of 1943. 7 separate complexes were planned along the Montanas Karuja and around the Castello Xias, a medieval fortress that would be transformed into Hitler's possible headquarters. The 7 points have names that today frequent military history books and treasure hunter forums: Walim Rzeczka, Jugowicz, Vlodars, Sobon, Sokolek, Osovka, and Castello Xias itself. Each would be autonomous, but the larger plan envisioned that all would be connected by narrow-gauge railroads running through the tunnels themselves, transforming the entire system into a unified underground city spread across the mountain range. In April 1944, Hitler, dissatisfied with the speed of the works, transferred control of the project to the Organisation Todt, the engineering arm of the Tercero Reich, headed by Albert Speer himself. That same month, prisoners from concentration camps began arriving at the Montanas Coruja on a large scale. And here we come to the part that tourist posters do not mention in large letters. The workers who excavated the tunnels of Projeto Riza were, in their overwhelming majority, prisoners from the Gross Rosen camp, located nearby. At least 13,000 prisoners were identified in partial documents that survived. 70% were Hungarian Jews. The rest came from Polonia, Grecia, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hollanda, Belgica, and Alemania itself. Many had passed through Auschwitz before being sent to the mountains. The doctrine applied had an official name in German: Vernichtung durch Arbeit, extermination through labor. It was not a metaphor. It was a formal, documented administrative policy applied with bureaucratic efficiency. Food rations were calculated below the minimum necessary to sustain the required physical effort. Work shifts extended for hours inside corridors where dynamite explosions left suspended rock dust that entered the lungs. Typhus swept through the camps regularly. Children under 12 were recorded pushing mining carts in the narrowest corridors. The average life expectancy of a prisoner in Projeto Riza was 3 to 4 months, not years. Not enough months to see a season change completely. A worker who arrived in March had statistically little chance of reaching the summer. Approximately 5,000 prisoners died during construction, according to partially preserved documents. But this number hides something even more disturbing, because when the Exército Vermelho advanced through Baja Silesia in January 1945 and SS troops were forced to retreat at speed, between 7,000 and 30,000 prisoners simply disappeared. Estimates vary by more than 20,000 people because records were deliberately destroyed before the escape. The mass graves where these men, women, and children were buried were never found. Never. In 80 years of searching. And here comes the most unsettling part of this entire story. An SS unit managed to remain in the area of Walim-Rzeczka until May 1945, days after the official end of the war in Europa. During this period, the unit systematically dynamited all the entrances to the complexes. They sealed passages with explosives. They covered access points with debris. They obliterated markings and cartographic references. Whatever was stored inside, and whatever the surviving workers knew, was buried under tons of deliberately collapsed rock. What would justify this level of meticulous attention at that specific moment of total collapse when every hour counted for escape? Let's go now to what the Sovieticos found when they arrived. They were not wide-open corridors to explore. The Exército Vermelho found mountains with sealed entrances, partially flooded corridors, and a staggering amount of construction materials scattered through the surrounding forests. Petrified cement bags, coiled electrical cables, narrow-gauge railroad tracks covered in vegetation, foundations of above-ground buildings that were never finished. It was as if an entire city had been abandoned in the middle of construction, and the haste of the escape was so great that there was no time to clean up the tracks. But the Sovieticos did not give up easily. Soviet search teams conducted systematic excavations in the following years. What researchers discovered decades later is revealing in its details. Inside some sections of the tunnels that were eventually opened and explored, they found markings in Russian on dynamite packaging, and they found metal safes with swastikas engraved on them. Safes that were empty. What did the Sovieticos specifically look for in those corridors? What was in those safes before they were emptied? These answers are in archives that have not been opened to the public. Now let's talk about the real scale of the project, because this is where the official version starts to make no sense at all. A simple economic fact changes the perspective completely. In 1944, Narzisste Alemannia allocated a specific amount of concrete to build air raid shelters for the civilian population throughout the territory of the Reich. The concrete consumed only by Progetto Riese in that same year was higher than that total amount. While German citizens waited for protection that never arrived, the Montanhas Coruja consumed more material than the country's entire civil protection program. This is not the behavior of someone building an emergency bunker for a single man. The internal structure of the complexes reinforces this impression. The Osauka complex has approximately 1 kilometer and 700 meters of narrow corridors interconnected with rooms and side passages, with rooms up to 10 meters high. The Vlodars complex is the largest of those known, with 3 kilometers of tunnels, but 30% of them are permanently flooded, and part of the tourist route is done in boats in almost total darkness. The Waliamzechka set has 500 known meters, but the site administrators themselves acknowledge that the real entrance to the main network of tunnels was never found. There are ventilation shafts visible on the surface that lead nowhere that has been discovered. And then there is the matter of Speer's number. 213,000 cubic meters of tunnels excavated, according to the chief architect's calculations. Less than 100,000 located and mapped to this day. The difference is equivalent to several blocks of a dense city spread across corridors that run dozens of meters deep. This space exists. It is there inside the rocks. We simply do not know where. And if we do not know where it is, we also do not know what is inside. Most military historians today believe that Progetto Riese was, in its primary function, an attempt to create a network of underground armament factories. The structure of the complexes corresponds point for point with another project that actually functioned during the war. The Mittelwerk, the factory installed inside the Kohnstein mountain in Thuringia, which had approximately 20 kilometers of tunnels and produced about 5,000 V-2 rockets between 1944 and 1945. The tunnels of Progetto Riese have the same basic architecture, the same narrow railroads for internal transport, the same parallel corridors connected by transverse passages, the same drainage systems, the same spatial logic of a factory, not a residence or a simple command bunker. But there is a detail that does not fit this explanation and that the most serious researchers cannot completely rule out. In 1992, the Polonese researcher Igor Witkowski claimed to have had access to interrogations of SS members conducted by Polynesia intelligence in the post-war period. In these documents, according to Witkowski, there were references to experiments conducted in the surroundings of the Montanhas Coruja complexes. The experiment involved a device that spun materials at extremely high speeds inside an intense electromagnetic field, and which produced effects on gravity and on space itself that did not correspond to any physics known at the time. The device was shaped like a metal bell. In German, Die Glocke, the bell. The most rigorous historians treat the story as a fabricated myth. No physical evidence of the device has been found. No verifiable primary document has been produced. Serious researchers point out that the internal inconsistencies of the account are numerous. But the question does not go away. Why did the SS unit remain in the Montanhas Coruja for days after the official end of the war, dynamiting entrances with unusual meticulousness, when any hour of delay increased the chance of capture? Why did the prisoners who knew the geometry of the tunnels, who had spent months or years excavating every meter of those corridors, disappear in numbers that estimates cannot pin down? What was the content of the safes with swastikas that the Sovieticos found empty? One thing is certain. The evidence destruction protocol applied to Progetto Riesa was exceptionally careful, exceptionally systematic, and exceptionally expensive in time and human lives. Someone considered that what was stored inside was worth more than the lives of tens of thousands of people, and more than the precious days the SS had available before the arrival of the Sovieticos. Now we come to the story that, in August 2015, made the whole world look at the Montanas Coruja at the same time. On August 20th of that year, two men presented themselves to the international press. Andreas Richter, a German engineer, Piotr Koper, a Polonaise treasure hunter. They claimed to have located the Nazista gold train. The source was a dying man, an elder who claimed to have participated in the loading and sealing of the train decades earlier. Combined with ground-penetrating radar readings, the two indicated a precise location near the city of Wałbrzych, on the outskirts of the Montanas Coruja. The legend of the train had existed for decades in that region. The story said that in late 1944 or early 1945, an armored train departed from the city of Breslau, today Wrocław, loaded with 300 tons of gold, jewelry, artwork looted from every nation occupied by Alemannia, and possibly pieces of the Sala de Ambar, the chamber of amber panels of inestimable value, stolen from the Palacio de Caterina in St. Petersburgo in 1941 and never recovered since. The train would have entered a sealed tunnel on the outskirts of Wałbrzych and disappeared into the rock. 300 tons of gold that never appeared anywhere, in a region that everyone knows is perforated by sealed tunnels. The reaction to the announcement was immediate and intense. Polonia declared that any treasure found on Polonaise soil would belong to the Polonaise state. Alemannia indicated that goods that had been German remained German. Lawyers for Jewish families from all over Europa began preparing petitions arguing that any gold found had been originally confiscated from persecuted populations and should be restored. And tourism in Wałbrzych increased 44% in a matter of weeks. The excavation took place in August 2016. A team of 64 people, including engineers, geologists, chemists, archaeologists, and a military demolition specialist, began digging at the point indicated by Richter and Koper. 7 days later, the work was halted. No tracks, no tunnel, no train. The ground-penetrating radar images that had been interpreted as an armored composition were, as subsequent analysis determined, natural ice formations inside the rock. The mayor of Wałbrzych, instead of lamenting the result, publicly declared that the publicity generated by the search was equivalent to $200 million in tourism promotion. The city's annual promotion budget was $380,000. The mayor said he was considering naming a roundabout in honor of Richter and Koper, but the story was not closed. In April 2025, an anonymous group called Gold Train 2025 sent a formal letter to the authorities of Wałbrzych. The letter was filed under the 2025 law on found objects of Polonia and claimed that the group had located 3 wagons of a World War II train, hidden behind a sliding steel gate in a camouflage tunnel in the Distrito Florestal de Świdnica. The letter included 4 technical attachments: a map of the tunnel route, precise geographic coordinates, a terrain profile, and the testimony of a resident of Wałbrzych who lived during the war. A spokesperson for the City Hall described the letter as factual and specific. In July 2025, technical teams were in the field conducting preliminary evaluations. The result is not yet definitive. But what is definitive is the current state of the complexes that were opened to the public and what they reveal about what has not yet been found. In the Osauka complex, tourists follow a route that includes 2 of the 3 existing tunnels. on the extreme route, and part of the journey is done in boats that cross flooded corridors in almost total darkness. Inside the rooms, exhibits show drilling instruments, military helmets, and tools collected throughout the explorations. On the wall of one of the main rooms, there are markings on the ceiling that guides point out carefully. According to exploration analysis, on the other side of that wall, there may exist a corridor that connects the complexes, or a room whose access the Nazistas concealed before leaving. But this has not been confirmed. In Vlodars, a trail above ground allows visitors to see the foundations of barracks that were never dismantled, water reservoirs built to supply the works, depots with thousands of petrified cement bags that have existed since the war. Inside the tunnels, narrow-gauge railroad tracks still run through part of the corridors, and an old locomotive remains exactly where it was left when construction was abandoned. In Wałimierzyca, the museum exists in corridors that represent only a fraction of what is in that mountain. The museum acknowledges this in its own explanatory materials. The real entrance to the main network was never found, and out there, in the forests of the Montañas Coruja, those who walk the marked trails find the tracks that haste left scattered on the ground, foundations of buildings that were never dismantled, moss-covered railroad tracks that go towards slopes and disappear, ventilation shafts that emerge from the forest floor for no apparent reason to those who do not know what exists below them. Every ventilation shaft without a known entrance is an open question. Every track that disappears into the rock is an unfulfilled promise. Every anomaly detected by ground-penetrating radar and not yet excavated is a closed file. We started with the popular myth. The Projeto Riese was Hitler's bunker, the underground fortress of a dictator who feared bombers. This myth explains enough for most people. It explains the castle with its 2 kilometers of tunnels and its 50-meter deep elevator shaft, built so that Hitler could descend directly to the underground facilities. It explains the ventilation systems sized for 900 people, and it closes the matter reasonably satisfactorily. But it does not explain why the resources consumed exceeded the entire civil protection program of Alemanha. It does not explain the industrial architecture of the complexes, identical to that of the rocket factory that actually functioned inside another mountain. It does not explain the empty safes with Soviet markings. It does not explain the disappearance of tens of thousands of prisoners whose mass graves were never located. And it does not explain why an SS unit spent precious days at the end of the war dynamiting entrances with a meticulousness that seems disproportionate for those who would merely be destroying an unfinished bunker. Projeto Riese was not a bunker. It was a parallel world built inside the rock, intended to ensure the survival of the Terceiro Reich even after the collapse of the surface. It was not finished. It was not fully discovered. And the men who would know exactly what was in those corridors, both the prisoners who excavated every meter and the soldiers who sealed the entrances, either died or took the secret to graves that were also never found. The most important discovery we made today is not about gold or armaments or experimental devices. It is about the nature of the silence that surrounds this place. The silence of the corridors that no one opened, the silence of the documents that were burned, the silence of the Soviet archives that remain closed, and the silence of the mountains, which guard more than half of what was built inside them, without having delivered that secret to anyone yet. 80 years later, with all the subsurface imaging technologies available today, with ground-penetrating radars and geophysical sensors and satellites and archaeology teams and treasure hunters and governments with a political interest in the result, more than half of Projeto Riese remains exactly where the Nazistas left it, inside the rock, untouched, waiting. And perhaps that is the most terrifying lesson that Projeto Riese has to teach. It is not about what the Nazistas built. It is about how much it is possible to hide inside a mountain and ensure that the secret lasts longer than all those who knew it. The Montañas Caruje know what is inside, for now only they do.